recently adopted and adjusting to life in his new home. His mother was working with a language coach to learn some English, and Kanzi usually came along, though he didn't appear to pay much attention. But the language coach noticed that he seemed to be picking up on how to communicate just by watching his mother's lessons. Oddly enough, it appeared that he was picking things up faster than his mom. For example, the phrases "you tickle" and "tickle you" meant two different things, and Kanzi's mom, she was having a hard time understanding that syntax. One day, Kanzi was hanging out playing with stuffed animals, and the coach asked him to make the dog bite the snake. Kanzi put the snake into the dog's mouth like it was no big deal. It was a really big deal, because Kanzi is a bonobo. He's actually a language superstar, even among the elite research primates like Koko the gorilla. Kanzi is the first ape to demonstrate that language can be acquired spontaneously through observation without planned training, and the first to show a rudimentary understanding of grammar, syntax, and semantics. Again, really big deal, especially because for years humans have been proclaiming that it's language that sets us apart from other animals. But are we really alone? Turns out that question keeps getting more and more complicated. Technically, we define language as a set of spoken, written, or signed words and the way we combine them to communicate meaning. If we change that definition to include the use of complex grammar, then maybe we are alone. But if language is simply the ability to communicate through a meaningful sequence of symbols, as I might do while looking for a bathroom in Sweden, or Kanzi does when she's asking for roast marshmallows, well then, welcome to the club, apes. We communicate in part by engaging our brains and bodies to make sounds that let us transfer thoughts from our brain to other people's brains. But of course, language is more than just making air vibrate with sound. I can communicate by moving my hands, which you might have noticed I do pretty frequently, or by using visual symbols. All of these forms of language allow us to comprehend things we've never actually witnessed and exchange information with each other quickly and effectively to, get a job or be a friend or use a metaphor. It's hard to imagine a fulfilling life without some kind of language. Humans have nearly 7,000 different languages, and no matter how different they sound, we can break down their basic structure in the same way, using the same 3 building blocks. The smallest of them are phonemes. These are very short, distinctive sound units like ah, t, ch, sh, like stuff like that. English uses about 40 of them. Phonemes go together to make morphemes, which are the smallest units that carry meaning. This can be words or parts of words like a prefix or a suffix. For example, the word speech is a morpheme that contains 4 phoneme sound units, s, p, e, and ch. From there, you arrange morphemes into your language's grammar or system of rules, allowing you to say the things that you want to say. So those 40 English phonemes give us over 100,000 morphemes that produce the more than 616,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary, which can be arranged into an infinite number of sentences, paragraphs, Wu-Tang lyrics, or Shakespearean plays. And just as the structure of language starts small, so does how we learn language. And we start very young. The word infant comes from the Latin infans, meaning not speaking, but as early as 4 months, they can recognize differences in speech and start to read lips matching mouth movements with their corresponding sounds like ah, e, I, o, ooh. And even at this age, you gotta watch what you say about kids in their presence, because this also marks the beginning of receptive language, or the ability to understand what's being said both to and about us. Soon that receptive language blooms to accommodate productive language, when instead of just understanding other people, babies start developing the ability to produce words. Of course that takes a while, but in the meantime, they get a lot of practice babbling. Beginning at about 4 months, they start to make all sorts of sounds. Although you may get a dada or a mama, babbling is not an imitation of adult speech. In fact, it typically includes sounds from many different languages, and a stranger couldn't tell if a kid was Italian or Kenyan or Korean just by the sound of her babbling. Similarly, deaf babies will watch their parents signing and start babbling with their hands. By about 10 months, that babbling morphs into something that starts to make sense, and mama probably really means mama. Now, without exposure to other languages, a child will actually lose the ability ability to both hear and create particular tones and sounds that aren't part of his or her household language. So someone who speaks English around the house soon won't be able to differentiate between certain phonemes in Mandarin if they heard them, for instance, or between aspirated and non-aspirated consonants in Hindi. By the time they're mowing down the first birthday cake, most kids will be entering the one-word stage of language development. They now know that sounds carry specific meanings and connect the sound dog to that furry thing across the room. By around 18 months, their capacity for learning new words jumps from about 1 a week to 1 a day, and by the time they're 2, they're probably speaking in 2-word statements. These choppy sentences are kind of like a telegraphic speech. They sound like clumsy texts or old-school telegrams, using mostly nouns and verbs. Want juice, no pants, that kind of stuff. These little sentences make sense, and they follow the rules of their language's syntax. For example, an English-speaking child would put an adjective before a noun, black cat, while a Spanish speaker would reverse that, gato negro. From there, the average kid is soon uttering longer phrases and complete sentences, refusing to put pants on and demanding more crackers. Most humans hit these same milestones during their language development, but there are competing theories about how our infant babbles turn into complex sentences and how we acquire language. You'll remember B.F. Skinner, the pioneering behaviorist who brought us learning through reinforcement. He believed language was a product of associative principles and operant conditioning. Skinner argued that a kid learned to associate words with meanings largely through reinforcement. So in the Skinner model, for example, if baby Bruno says, and his mother gives him some milk, he'll find that the outcome, both the milk and the attention, rewarding, and eventually work his way up to saying milk through these learned associations and shaping processes. It's good to be understood, right? But as usual, not everyone was on board with Skinner. In particular, legendary American linguist Noam Chomsky argued that a kid like Bruno would never reach his full complex sonnet-writing potential if his learning was dependent on conditioning alone. Chomsky instead proposed the idea of innate learning and ubiquitous grammatical categories, pointing out that while the world's thousands of languages may sound wildly diverse, they're actually very similar, sharing some basic elements. He called this universal grammar. Chomsky's universal grammar posited that all human languages contain nouns, verbs, and adjectives, and humans are born with an innate ability to acquire language and even a genetic predisposition to learn grammatical rules. Rather than being linguistic blank slates, Chomsky suggested that we're hardwired for it from day one. In the end, though, we're still not sure how we acquire language. However, developmental research and studies of other species have given us a sense that at least some of it is innate, while the role of learning and exposure is also important. So if it's true that all humans have some innate capacity for language, where in the brain is it sitting? We've talked a lot about how function is localized in the brain, and that is definitely true for some aspects of language. But while speaking, reading, writing, and even singing all fall under the language umbrella, their locations in the brain are a little more complicated. Consider aphasia, a neurological impairment of language. People can experience lots of different kinds of aphasia depending on whether they've suffered an injury or stroke or a tumor or dementia. So maybe they can speak but not read. Maybe they can sing but barely speak, or write but not read. The region of the brain known as Broca's area in the left frontal lobe is involved with the production of speech. If I suffered a trauma to this area, I might still comprehend speech, but struggle to speak. Although I might still be able to sing, because that's conducted elsewhere in the brain. On the other hand, if that falling coconut struck another region called the Wernicke's area, a region in the left temporal lobe involved in the expression and comprehension of language, I'd still be able to speak, but my language wouldn't make any sense. So you might find me saying something like, "It was 2 pizza, I called Purple Brother on the television." Aphasia and other brain injuries remind us how thinking and language are both separate and intricately entwined. For instance, it's hard to say if nonverbal ideas come to us first and we think of the words to name them, or if instead our thoughts are born in language, or if we'd be able to even think without it. And because language often helps to frame your ideas, your thinking might actually be influenced by which language you're using. So what are the implications of this if we expand the definition of language to include other species? How might Kanzi's ability to communicate that he wants a marshmallow affect his thinking? And how might that thinking influence his language progression and his identity? If only I had the words to describe how fascinating this all is. If you understood the language I was using today, you learned how languages are built from phonemes, morphemes, and grammar, and when children acquire receptive and productive language and pass through the babbling 1-word and 2-word phases of development, development. You also learned some theories on how we acquire language, what brain areas are involved, and how thinking and language are connected. Thanks for watching, especially to all of our Subbable subscribers. If you'd like to sponsor an episode of Crash Course or even be animated into an upcoming episode, just go to subbable.com/crashcourse. This episode was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake T. Pastino, and our consultant is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwat. Our director and editor is Nicholas Jenkins. The script supervisor is Michael Aranda, who is also our sound designer. And the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. Un royaume de solitude m'a placé là pour toujours. Der Wind heult so wie der Sturm ganz tief in mir. Het wordt mij te veel, hoe men best ook deed. 他们进来看见，做好女孩就像你的从前。Wie zou in hen ting wat du än gör alltid förstört. Är ni nå, mamma nå, 姿見せるのよ。Libre soy, libertad sin vuelta atrás. A szívemen ül a jég. Desde la distancia, qué pequeño todo es. Y las cosas que dominaban per sempre han fugit. Non è un difetto, è una virtù e non la fermerò mai più. Ne manderò aiuto che stadie kraj na krilima vetra sam co je gilče soka moguća ti pejka štaki I pofikar penyatim besar. Kuasa ku buat hidup bercelana. Подвластный мне мороз и легко, что за дивный дар. Och som krystaller står intanke ganske klar. Det spröda födas när mina låtar Laat den gå, jeg skal stige lik solen rød. Når jeg faller som den, det gir meg hemmelighet. Je suis là, comme je l'ai rêvé. En de storm raste. De vrieskou, daar zat ik toch al niet mee.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Test 2 Plus today. I'm Trace. This is a show where we take a big topic, we break it down into a bunch of different pieces so we all get it a little better. This is episode 2 of 5 on language, and today we're going to talk about how language makes your brain bigger. Literally, it does that. When you have a new language in your brain has to essentially grow in size. It has to make more connections. It has to learn how to do this whole new thing. And a Swedish Armed Forces Interpreter Academy had a study where students were tasked with learning a language at a very fast rate. MRI scans were showing that specific parts of the brain were developing in size. They were getting bigger just because they were learning a language. Another group was tasked with learning something else. Just something. You guys learned this. Their brain structures didn't change in size at all. So learning a language is really great for your brain for a number of different reasons. It also significantly improves cognitive function when you pick up a new language. A study found that young adults proficient in 2 languages performed better on attention tests, had better concentration as well than those who spoke only 1 language. This is a study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology. There was also a landmark study in the Annals of Neurology by the American Neurological Association. And this was a longitudinal study. So what they did is, it was over time. They scanned kids' brains and then came back decades later and scanned their brains again, and they found better cognitive function at an older age when they learned a second language at an early age. So if they learned a language when they were young, they had better cognitive function when they were older. It actually slowed down brain aging and held off Alzheimer's in these people for more than 4.3 years, or approximately that. Cognitive functions were not hindered, and in fact, their brains were healthier as adults because they'd learned a second language as a kid. Isn't that great? Being bilingual or trilingual or more is really awesome for your brain. So what happens in your brain when you hear a word is that the sound is arriving in sequential order. So your brain starts to populate the rest of the word as it hears it. Sort of like Google autocomplete, right? You start typing and you're getting things and it's trying to figure out what you're typing. It's the same thing, your brain does that too. So if I were trying to say the word canister, your brain hears can, and your brain just now when I said that started putting words together inside of itself. It was like can, Canada, cannot, cannery, cannabis, candle, canonical, canal. It was like, I'm trying to figure this out. Of course, that's just English words. When you're bilingual, it's also going to include words from your second language. And if you're trilingual, third language. It's going to try all of these different combinations. That is a lot of processing. It requires a lot of effort. The thing is, though, that would make you think that, language was determining what you're thinking, which isn't really true at all, although it's still debated. One of our writers here came up with a quote based on a number of other different kind of ideas, which is, culture could be shaped through the prism of language, which we really liked. Nice one, Jules. According to Roman Jacobson, a world-renowned linguist, languages differ essentially in what they must convey, not in what they may convey, right? So language doesn't determine what you think, but it can determine how you think about things. So the word fork in French is a feminine word. In Spanish, it's a masculine word. Many Latin-based languages have masculine and feminine words. So the word playa in Spanish means beach, and it is a feminine word because it ends in an A. If it ended in an O, it would be a masculine word. So what they did in this study is they asked people to say a word, like the word fork, in a cartoon voice. The participants in French made a high-pitched voice because that word is feminine. In Spanish, they made a masculine grunty voice because that word is masculine. It's the same word. It's a fork. It's just a thing. But we ascribe ideas to it based on our own language, right? Our language determines, it's the prism in which we see the world. It's really an interesting way to look at it. Another example might be some indigenous tribes will say north, south, east, and west, rather than saying left or right. So when we're walking down the street and you ask somebody where to go, they'll say, oh, go down there and turn right. Some people, in English, but also some tribes, will just say, go down here and turn east. Now, depending on which way you're facing, east is never going to change, but right will, and as a consequence, the people in these tribes have usually better spatial orientation because they always understand where they're facing. Russian speakers who have more words for light and dark blue are better able to visually discriminate shades of blue. And that also works in English. Think about it this way. Designers, or people who work in fashion, or people who work in color, are better at describing color. And some theories would suggest that they actually physically see more color than people who don't have words for that. If you see 3 different pinks in a row, and some people say, well, that's pink, and that's magenta, and that's fuchsia. Some people would just say pink, and that's also pink. It's like a different pink, and that's a different pink. They may physically remember those things later as just one shade of pink, because that's how their language has changed their perception. English is a Germanic language, which makes languages like Scandinavian and Dutch easier to learn, and it's also Latin-based, which makes French, Italian, and Spanish easier to learn. The thing is, there's no origin sharing with Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or Arabic, so that makes them very difficult to learn. The easiest language to learn when you're an English speaker, according to the Foreign Service Institute, comes in various categories. So category 1 takes about 23 to 24 weeks, or about 600 hours at most, and you can learn Afrikaans, Danish, Dutch, French, Italian, Latin-based languages especially. Easy, because English also based in there. Category 2 takes about 30 weeks, 750 hours, that's German. Completely different pronunciations and things, lots of different words, much more complicated. Category 3, 36 weeks, or about 900 hours. You can get Indonesian, Malaysian, Swahili. You're getting more and more complicated, less and less similar to your native language. Again, this is for English speakers. Category 4 is 44 weeks, or about 1,100 hours. You get Thai, Albanian, Vietnamese, Russian. Category 5 is 2,200 hours, and that's Arabic, Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese, and Korean. And these are languages just like English, except they're not at all like English. Some of these languages have basis in ideograms instead of, vocabulary construction in the way that English does. And on top of that, Mandarin very famously has tones. That is to say, it's got a variety of different tonal levels that you will have to speak in, and different tones mean different things. There's also something else when you get to things like Mandarin, where you have tonal languages. Languages where if I say hi versus hi, those can be two very different meanings. And this is why Chinese and similar languages are very difficult for English speakers. We're not used to speaking in tones. And science does say, though, interestingly, that tonal language speakers have distinct advantages when they're learning to play or at least understand musical instruments. Because a PLOS One study looked at Cantonese speakers who had no musical training. They possessed pitch and tone understanding similar to trained musicians, as opposed to English speakers with no tone base. We don't understand it as easily. So languages are good for your brain. I think we can all agree. Do you know any other languages? How many do you know? Tell us down in the comments. Make sure you subscribe for more Test Tube Plus. Come back tomorrow, and we're going to talk a little bit about how language evolves.
So, I have a little test for you. Don't panic. I'm not here to judge you. It's just a little test, okay? First, you get 30 seconds to memorize 10 words in the right order. After that, you get 30 seconds to write down what you remembered. And then finally, you get 30 seconds to check your answers. So, are you guys ready? Well, we're gonna start anyway. So, memorize 10 words in the right order in 30 seconds. In 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, stop. Now, write down what you remember. Okay, and stop. Now, quickly check your answers. Okay, and stop. So, very exciting. I heard a lot of grunting and moaning, so I hope I didn't stress you out too much. Now, a moment of reflection. I'd like you to ask yourself, how did I memorize this? And was it the best way to do it? Now, for the generation of my parents and grandparents, being able to memorize something like this was an absolutely essential skill. But nowadays, why would anyone want to remember a list of anything? You just take a picture of the screen and you're done, right? So, with all the technology we have these days, it seems as if memorizing has somehow become less important. So why should we then, in today's day and age, still want to get better at memorizing? Well, to answer that question, I'd like to tell you a little story. In high school, I flunked a grade twice. After 7 years of torture, I finally got my diploma. Sweet, sweet freedom. What would I do with it? I didn't know. One thing I did know, however, was that I didn't want to go back to school because that old learning business, it wasn't cut out for me. So instead, I went to sunny California for 9 months. And there I worked as a bagger. Not beggar, bagger. So in a supermarket, I had to put people's groceries in bags, and then I'd get a little tip. Surprisingly, that year I learned so much. I learned how to bag a bunch of groceries really, really quickly. I learned how to drive a car. And in California, people are a little bit more open than they are in Amsterdam. So I also learned how to have a little chat with a stranger, just for the hell of it. That year, I discovered that I don't hate learning, just a specific way of doing it. So I decided to go and study psychology. Now, for the first time ever, I was getting information that I absolutely wanted to know. Now, I was spending more time in the library than I spent skipping school as a teenager, voluntarily. The only problem was that I was spending all of my time in the library because I'd never learned how to learn. So I started experimenting with different methods of reading text, of memorizing text, and I got my reading time of 3 hours per chapter down to 1. This way of studying enabled me to do an honors program, to get my degree, and to fall in love with learning. And now, I happily work for a company called Remind, in which we teach people the science and art of learning. We're trying to bring back into education what we ourselves missed. Now, for the past 3 years, we've also organized the Dutch National Memory Championships for high schoolers. We do this to show that everybody is capable of amazing feats of memory, but also to show that memorization is about a lot more than just learning your French or your Spanish words. And today, I'd also like to share this with you. So, in the beginning, I made you do this little test, just to make you aware of how you're memorizing things right now. Next, I'd like to give you a new type of memory experience. This time, you can even sit back and relax. So I'm going to ask you to find a comfortable position to sit, to close your eyes, and to take a deep breath. Now, I want you to think of someone you know called John. And I want you to see him. Now, John just grabbed the sun out of the sky, and he just threw it on your feet. And now your feet are getting really big and red and swollen because John just threw the sun on your feet. Now, you look to your knees, and on your knees, you see 10 little guys playing basketball. Very strange sight. And on their shirts, you can see in brightly colored letters, the New York Knicks. So you have some Knicks on your knees. Next, you look to where your thighs are, but they're gone. Your thighs have been replaced with Fords, the cars. They could be Ford Focuses or Ford Mustangs. Your thighs have been replaced with Fords. Now, with your bottom, you feel a hard plastic seat of a go-kart vibrating. With your bottom, you feel the hard plastic seat of a go-kart. Your belly starts rumbling very loudly. So you follow your belly and it leads you to McDonald's. And there, Ronald McDonald starts shooting rays of light at you with a ray gun. Ronald McDonald is shooting rays of light at you with a ray gun. He hits you on your chest, and now from your chest, a big bush of gray hairs is growing. A huge bush of gray hairs growing from your chest. So obviously you hurry home to shave it off, and on your doormat, you see a letter. So you open it, and it has good news. As you read it, you feel a huge weight falling off your shoulders. A huge weight falling off your shoulders. Your shoulders get all light and tingly because you just paid all of your bills. Big bills, little bills, each and every bill has been paid for, and you have plenty of money to spare. Now, you proceed to the bathroom because now on your neck, a bunch of tiny bushes of thin blonde hairs have appeared. On your neck, a bunch of tiny bushes of thin blonde hair. As you look in the mirror, suddenly your mouth just starts talking all by itself. And it's saying, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Now you turn around, and now suddenly your eyes hurt. Because Donald Duck just poked out both of your eyes with a trumpet made of pure gold. Now, you can open your eyes again and come back to this place. Luckily, it's a lot safer here than where you just came from. So, I just made you guys memorize the past 10 presidents of the United States of America in the right order. Now, I'm going to show you, and then you can see how many of these you still know. So, with each body part, I'm going to ask you what happened there, and then you can think of it. Even better would be if you just shout it out. Now, what happened to your feet? John threw the sun. Yeah, President Johnson. Now, what happened on your knees? Nix. Yes, President Nixon. Okay, so what were your thighs replaced with? Fords, President Ford. Okay, and what did you feel with your bottom? Okay, President Carter, yes. Some people are ahead of the game. Now, your belly led you to McDonald's. What happened? Okay, Ronald McDonald shooting rays. Yeah, okay. So, Ronald Reagan. He hit you in your chest and you got what? Big bush of gray hairs. Bush Sr. Yes. Now, your shoulders got light. Why? Paid all your bills, Bill Clinton. Now, what did you have on your neck? Okay, yeah. A bush of thin blonde hairs, Bush Jr. What was your mouth saying? Yes, we can, President Obama. And what happened to your eyes? Yeah. Donald Duck, trumpet, pure gold, who else but Donald Trump? So, if you memorized more this time than the first time, please stand up. Okay, so we have almost everyone standing up. That's awesome. Now, if you think this way of memorizing is more fun than the last way you used, please stand up or remain standing if you're already standing. Oh, whoa, now we almost have everyone. I'm very pleased to see this. Okay, you guys can sit back down. Thank you very much. Now, when you make bizarre images to memorize, suddenly it becomes a lot easier. If you tie these bizarre images to a place you know well, like your body, suddenly memorizing things in order becomes a lot easier. Okay, well, cool. But I asked you guys in the beginning, why should we, in today's day and age, still want to get better at this, at memorizing? Well, because by getting better in a skill like this, you can also get better at a different skill, the skill of experimentation. By experimenting with different methods of doing things, I found out that I can get better at anything. I found out what works for me and what doesn't. What if I'd never learned the skill of experimentation? I may have never gone back to school. I may have never enjoyed studying psychology. And I probably would not have been standing here today. Because one of the things I thought I really couldn't do was public speaking. Now, there are people of every generation not doing things that they might love, that they might even be great at, because they think they can't do it. So how beautiful would it be if in schools we can teach kids that they can get better at anything, and they can even get better at getting better at things, get it? But not just the kids, because the older generation is often seen as too old to learn. But they're not too rusty. Anyone can improve themselves by experimenting, and I hope you experience that today. Now, at Remind, we break up this process of experimentation into 3 steps: the check, the experience, and the experiment. The check is all about becoming aware of what you're doing right now. So maybe during the first test, you became aware of the fact that you just repeat the words over and over, and that doesn't work too well. The second step, the experience, is all about being open to new possibilities and trying them out. So maybe during the visualization, you realize that this works a bit better, or at least you like it more. And the third step is the experiment. This is about taking something from that new experience that you had and applying it in your own life to see how it works for you. So maybe you're one of those people that when someone introduces themselves to you, you just immediately forget their name. Yeah, sound familiar? And you want to use visualization to do something about that. So far, I've only taken you guys through the first 2 steps. The final step is up to you. So when I'm done here, I'd like you to take a moment for yourself and to write down an experiment on the little card we've given you and to put that in your wallet as a reminder. By continually following these steps of experimentation, you discover what you're doing. You keep yourself open to new possibilities, and you allow yourself to continually transform. And regardless of what you're learning, be it memorizing or martial arts or mathematics, you'll get better not only in the skill that you're trying to develop, but you'll get better at the process of learning itself. And that's something that sticks. It's something you could take with you to your new job, your new hobby, your new relationship, your new whatever. So this is something absolutely everyone should know. And I believe we should teach it in schools. But let's not just wait for it to be implemented in schools. I also believe that the most important change starts with the individual. It starts with you. So go out there and experiment. Learn something new or a new way of approaching something old. Because there are few skills as valuable as the art of learning. Thank you.